Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 297. Oh, geez, we're getting real close to 300. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach, and I'm back today with a second-timer, a returning champion to the podcast, David Figueroa-Martinez. My friend David, how is it going, sir? How have you been since the last time we chatted?
Doing great, actually. A lot of teaching, a lot of training, balancing work-life. So things are doing really well right now.
I am so glad to hear that, sir. Well, for those who missed the last chat, because it has been a while, probably longer than I remember, if people didn't hear the first time you were on, why don't you give yourself a quick introduction so that they know who you are and what you're all about?
So I am a Gracie black belt out of San Diego. I teach out of Gracie La Mesa. I have been running the 5 a.m. program for about 2.5 years now. I was on episode 243, Overcoming Trauma Through Jiu-Jitsu. So I have been training for about 13 years now, 3 as a black belt. Just feel like I have a lot that I want to share in general. So I love these moments.
Amazing, sir. Well, this whole thing came about because I was checking out your posts, I think on Threads, and you were talking about the difficult decisions around leaving a gym. And I mean, if people aren't following you on social, I always recommend that they do give you a follow, because the thing I like about your posts is that you're not afraid to show vulnerability and talk about real problems that people experience and to draw on your own experiences dealing with those problems. One of the things that you had discussed, and this led to us planning out this episode, was the difficult decision to leave a gym. There's a lot of reasons why someone may decide to do this, and it's very rarely an easy decision for a variety of reasons I'm sure we'll talk about here, but I'm going to turn the mic over to you here. Why don't you talk about what you shared and what your thoughts are on this? Kind of tell me your story and your feelings on this very difficult challenge that most people will probably go through at least once in their journey.
So I recently hit the 1-year mark of leaving my last gym. And for me, I'm really big on dates and like trying to remember what I was doing a year, 2, 3, 10 years, and kind of seeing where I was and where I am now. So I had made a post about my difficult decision of changing gyms, leaving gyms, and I was getting a lot of feedback from other people as what they went through. And generally speaking, it's not as covered as much as we would hope that it is. And so this was my time to kind of like share that. I have done the change twice in my 13 years. I did it once as a blue belt and then once about a year ago. And in both situations, neither was relatively easy. I think my first change came at blue, and I'm not a depressed person. I genuinely went through depression, and I did not want to train. I did not want to find a new school. I did. But even when I found the school, I found myself like, I would drive to the academy and I would sit in the car and I would have to have a conversation with myself. Just get up and go, get up and go. But part of me just wanted to go back home. I just didn't want to train. I wasn't into it emotionally, mentally. I had gone through this little bit of a breakup, which in some ways feels like a divorce. You're no longer as connected with these people that you made these lifelong friendships with. You now have to create new friendships and new connections. And it's just incredibly hard. So when I went through it that first time, I just had the hardest time getting back into jiu-jitsu. It took me a really long time to start enjoying it and loving it again. My second time around, I had more experience. I was more confident in who I was, more confident in what I was looking for in a gym instructor, the things that I wasn't going to necessarily tolerate. And I got to a point where I was getting frustrated with what I was seeing in the treatment of others in terms of people maybe not being happy if you cross-trained, if you posted one thing or another, if you decided to go to a seminar at another gym. And I was battling a lot of that. And at the time, I was also getting a promotion at work. So I was supervising. I was listening to a lot of leadership books, audio, video, and I was in the process of creating what I wanted to be as a leader myself. And it wasn't jiving with what I was receiving at the academy, and I just had a hard time resolving that difference. And something occurred at the academy that I just could not ignore. Someone had been yelled at, and at that point, I just felt like I needed to make a decision, and I put in my notice, handed in my keys, and I ended up parting ways. One of the hardest things I've ever had to do, because I had been there, I want to say 7-8 years. I had made friendships with people that had been training with me from blue all the way to black, and those friendships were so meaningful to me, but at the same time, I didn't feel like that place felt like home, and I needed to just go somewhere else.
Yeah. Understandable. I would say there's probably two main reasons why people switch gyms. One of them, the less interesting reason, is just purely logistical. Sometimes you just have to. If you move out of country, for example, you might have no other choice. It's still a difficult decision, but a lot of the time, it's nothing personal. And usually the thing that most people need when it comes to how we support them through that transition is just letting them understand it's okay. There's nothing personal. But then the second reason why people leave gyms, and the one that I think really tears people up inside and that they probably want to talk about more, is when it is personal. When something has happened, usually that comes along the lines of some sort of big betrayal or the realization that these people that you loved are not the people that you thought they necessarily were. And in jiu-jitsu, that second one, I hate to say it, but most of us will probably experience that at some point. There is, to this day, a lot of really problematic behavior in jiu-jitsu, and if you train long enough, you're probably going to see it. And if that happens at your home gym, you might find yourself in a difficult position where you have to decide whether you want to stay or whether you want to go, depending on how seriously your instructor and the gym owner takes the problem and what the nature of the problem is. I myself have been through both of these scenarios. When I think I'm a black belt now under Emily Kwok. Emily is not the person who gave me my black belt. I got my black belt under Don Whitefield in Port Coquitlam. But the reason I switched is nothing against him. It's just purely logistical. He's an old dude. He moved off and retired in the Bahamas. But, I haven't seen him for it feels like 7-8 years. So just at some point, I got to have someone to put stripes on the black belt, right? And I thought, well, you know what? If I got to switch instructors anyway, I might as well go to one of my idols, one of the people who really helped define my journey and who has been so supportive all the way through. But that's the second time I switched gyms. I've talked on the podcast before about how when I was a blue belt, I had an experience very similar to yours where I saw behavior in the gym that I just had, it shocked me, and I decided at some point I wasn't okay with it. I made the difficult decision to pull the plug, and like you, I was really surprised at how hard that decision was. I never would have thought that switching martial arts gyms would feel like a serious breakup, but it's very hard to do, especially if the instructor or the gym owner is being unprofessional about it. So with that said, I'll turn it over to you. I would love to know your thoughts on how to navigate that kind of problem.
It's really difficult. And I think part of it is having maybe a group of people that are your confidants, people that maybe are outside of the gym. And I know it's hard if you're a white or blue belt, you haven't been spending a whole lot of time. By the time you get to black, I had friends kind of all over. I had acquaintances, different parts of the country. I had people that no longer trained with us, that went somewhere else, who also had to experience the same thing. So I was able to rely a lot on my past experiences of switching and having conversations with people that I was just really close with that assured me in a lot of ways that, hey, whatever your decision is, it's not going to alter your deepest connections with people. Yes, you're at a distance, you're not training at the same place, but more often than not, people kind of understand what the situation is, and they'll still be friends with you. They'll still hang out with you on occasion. They'll still talk to you. And that's really that was the biggest part of the whole thing, was like, what are people going to think of me? Especially at the time I was an instructor. So there's even a deeper connection to the gym. It's not just student to my instructor. I'm an instructor to others. So there's like a commitment that I've had to have with them in some ways that now I have to kind of break. And so at the time, relying on those people was huge. While it was uncomfortable, I didn't dwell on the emotional aspect as much. And where I was going, I was already teaching at, so I had a connection there as well. So it made that bridge and that connection a lot easier than my first time around. The first time around, it was a complete break. I didn't have a home to go to. The second time around, the gentleman that owned that gym and that I was already teaching at, he said, you have a home. Like, you don't have anything to worry about. You don't have to, if you want to train here, if you want to continue to teach here, by all means, I got you, which was massive for me. And I didn't have to like do the whole search of different gyms and what do I do next and where do I go? So I had a home, which made it a lot easier. But the entire episode of that disconnection, you will at times kind of second guess yourself. Am I doing the right thing? How are some people going to view me? How is the gym going to respond to my departure? Am I going to be talked about? Like, all those things come through your mind. And in some degree, they are all going to happen. Some people will look at you like you're a creonte or you disregarded that connection. Some people will completely understand. They've been around long enough. They've seen people come and go. And some people will just be indifferent.
Yeah. In a healthy gym, people come and go and it's not a big deal. Because there's a lot of reasons why people might leave. And, not all of them are big, crazy, drama-filled reasons. Sometimes people just move on to another stage in their life, or they move physically, or, there's a lot of reasons why someone might switch a gym, and it's not always something personal. So in a healthy gym culture, if people choose to leave, it's not really a big deal, and you always keep the door open for when they come back. But the challenge that I've found is, in jiu-jitsu, you often don't know if you're walking into a good culture until it's too late. Like, when you sign up at a gym, everyone's going to be super friendly and they're all going to seem super reasonable out of the gate, but it's not until you start doing things that they don't like that you're going to find out what these people are really like. And I think part of the reason why people sometimes struggle to leave gyms is because they've got this network of friends and maybe they've built what they believe to be really close relationships, but when it comes time to start leaving, they realize maybe these relationships aren't as tight-knit as I thought they were. People might be super friendly to you, but as soon as they find out you're thinking of leaving the gym, they'll turn on you on a dime. They might harass you. They might break ties with you. I think that's a big part of the reason why people are afraid to leave gyms. Just the fear of intimidation, of reprisal, of losing social connection. Sometimes in a good gym, that should not be a valid concern because real adults don't care about this kind of stuff. They're happy to be friends no matter what. But the one thing I have observed in jiu-jitsu, as I'm sure you have, is sometimes people get seriously upset about the idea of someone leaving a gym and they'll turn you into their worst enemy. I've got stories I don't want to share here. I'm sure everyone who's been training for a while does, of just horrific behavior that happened after someone left a gym. And then people at the old gym, sometimes even the head instructor, they harassed them. They went after the person. It's really disgusting behavior. And that is a reality of the sport, at least for now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to deal with this, because I don't think, obviously, that is definitely not a valid reason to refrain from moving on when it's time to move on. But it is something that people need to understand, is there are some toxic assholes in jiu-jitsu who will do this stuff to you, and you need to kind of know where you stand, I think, if you do want to switch gyms.
Yeah, there's a moment where you finally have had enough and there's no going back, where you just don't care about what might be said about you. And you just have to accept that the going on to the next phase is actually going to be best for you. And holding on to this concern of how they might treat you it's going to be secondary. And one of the things that I did when I left is I didn't really talk about it much. I didn't talk about it publicly. So I think that allowed some time to kind of like ease the departure. I'm not saying that they would have treated me any differently than they did, but I think that it wasn't this like public separation in a sense. Sometimes you watch these public separations on social media and they're going back and forth and they're on each other's pages and it just gets wild. I didn't do a whole lot, any of that. I left, I talked to my closest friends, people that I was really close with. I explained why I was leaving, but I didn't do anything publicly. So the most public thing was a year later when I made this post. And again, even in that, I didn't name anyone by name. My goal wasn't to trash anyone, but I do want to share my experiences at the same time. So for me, I think that was my way of at least letting the tensions subside and moving as professionally as I could. Nothing was done to me, which I'm thankful for. But I think that's the way you leave kind of aids in some of that. And I have remained in touch with many of the people that I was still close with. I give advice, I mentor, we chat on occasion. Sometimes they'll come into a situation of their own that I might give some advice to. The other thing that I would add, which sometimes just happens with your departure, I didn't poach. I didn't pull any students. I didn't try to get people on my side. I made the decision for myself, and I decided to let everything else just fall the way it fell. And if it got ugly, fine. It wasn't going to be part of my deal. And if it went peacefully, then I'm more happy with that.
Yeah, good advice there. I agree with you completely that launching an attack against your old gym on social media is never a good idea. But that said, though, sometimes you intend to leave a gym quietly, but the gym does not want to take the same approach. Sometimes they do want to chase you and harass you. And this is maybe putting you on the spot and putting you in a place where it's even unfair to ask you this. So do tell me if you feel that way. But what do you think someone should do in that case? I mean, if you choose to leave a gym and you start getting harassed by the former owner and the former gym members, I mean, what would you suggest that someone do in that position?
I think the best thing is probably just to ignore it. You don't want to feed into the energy. You don't want to add anything that's going to create this even bigger issue. I remember when a couple of black belts left when I was still at the academy, and there were a couple of people who felt upset about it. And I remember pulling them aside and explaining, like, we all just have to make decisions for ourselves. This isn't a gang. This isn't the army. It's none of those things. And we have to, when we're in that situation, we have to understand you're making decisions that are best for you and your family. They made decisions that's best for them and their family. So when I've seen it, I've tried to squash it. If you're in a situation that is just this hate-filled responses from them, I think your best bet is just to ignore it and keep living your life. It is really hard to argue and paint someone a certain way if they're not feeding into it. You're just arguing with yourselves. So my best bet, go your separate way, enjoy your life, don't add anything to it. As hard as that might be, because you always want to defend yourself, best bet, just leave it.
Now, there is one exception, though, and that is, I think, when your quality of life is being impacted or there is a safety risk, because this does happen sometimes, right? There are a lot of crazy people in jiu-jitsu, and again, sometimes you don't realize the craziness you're dealing with until it's too late. The only thing I would add on to that is if at any point you feel like there is a safety concern, I don't think you should hesitate to seek help. I think that sometimes people want to kind of keep these things quiet, but my feeling is if you feel like your safety is ever at risk, that is a situation where it makes sense to seek support from law enforcement or legal advice or something to that capacity. Again, I do not want to go outside of my lane here and tell people what to do in a very complex situation, especially one that I'm not an expert in. But I would say that most of the time, if it's just sour grapes, obviously you want to just put it behind you, right? Don't feed the fire. But if it gets to the point where you feel safety is at risk, I think there is a point where you need to decide that enough is enough. And that is a very difficult decision. I have seen that happen a few times, actually, where a gym breakup got so nasty that it kind of had to be escalated to the point where the police got involved, which is really not ideal and I think speaks terribly for the sport. I also don't want to scare people off and have them think that this is the normal thing that happens when people leave gyms. This is extraordinarily rare. But what I would say is most of the time, just kind of moving on with your life is the best option. But I do feel like there is a point where you have to be willing to say, this is crossing a legal or an ethical line. And especially if your safety is concerned, I think you need to start figuring out how you can actually bring in some support to protect yourself.
Definitely. And to your point, that's not the norm. That's exceedingly rare. But yes, if you get to that point, just like anything else, if someone is sexually harassing you, bullying you, coming by your house, any of these weird things that are now in the legal realm, by all means, take legal action. If we're just talking about this social media stuff and it's on the tamer side, it's not necessarily illegal, ignore it. Anything else, do what you need to do.
Yeah. And the other thing to point out and to build on what you said, very rarely does anything positive come out of slinging shit on social media. And I know it's really hard because when people attack you, you feel like you have to reply, but a lot of the time that just brings more negativity and it also impacts your reputation. This is something that I think people don't understand. When you feel obligated to respond to every person who's posting shit about you online, when people see someone else's messages about you, they might interpret that a certain way, but they're also going to pass judgment on the person who posted it. I mean, if you left a gym and your gym owner goes on a diatribe about what an awful person you are, a lot of people are going to look at that and say, well, it looks like David made the right decision there because that guy's a fucking lunatic. He made the right decision to leave that gym. So I think the important thing to understand is that if you reply to a lot of that negativity, now people might paint you with the same brush that they will paint the person who was attacking you in the first place. Everything that you say is going to become something that people can judge you on. And just by virtue of responding, you are now becoming the kind of person who talks shit online, and it's just going to get ugly. So unless there's a safety or a legal or an ethical risk, I think the best thing to do is just, like you said, back off quietly and start fresh somewhere else.
Completely agree. Completely.
Now, again, having this conversation, I do want to just reemphasize that things going that south are really the exception to the rule. It's extraordinarily unlikely that will happen to you, but it does happen. It is much more likely, though, that there could be some degree of sour grapes between you and the former gym if you leave, and that's unfortunate, but again, I think you have to stand up for yourself. I've certainly been in situations where I started to see things at the gym that I just really didn't agree with, and there came a time where I had to decide, am I going to go along with this kind of behavior? I decided no. And I'm super glad that I did, because I look back on where that gym wound up going many years later, and I am very glad I got out of there. So I really think it's important to follow your instincts on this. But like I mentioned earlier, David, a challenge that often happens is you will have all of these people that you train with who they feel like your closest friends, and you come to rely on their emotional support and that connection. But then if something comes between you and them, suddenly you find out that maybe your relationship wasn't as strong as you thought that it was. And again, you will see this when you leave a gym. Suddenly all of these people who were your closest friends and they were always happy to see you every day, now they want nothing to do with you. How do you deal with that as the person leaving the gym? Because it is hard. If someone is really truly your friend, then they won't do this to you. And frankly, if someone does decide to cut you out because you left the gym, it's probably for the best, because they weren't your real friend anyway. But there's still an emotional weight on the person leaving the gym. How do you deal with that when you know that some people, they claim to be your friend, but they're really only your friend because they're your jiu-jitsu friend, if that makes sense?
Completely. For me, I didn't, I'm 43 now, so I think I would have handled it differently at 23. But at 43, I have a different view of friendships than I did when I was younger. And for me, I'm at a point where I focus more on those that actually continued the friendship. So I have quite a few people who still message me, who still seek advice, who will talk to me about things, share memes with me. I focus more on those than the people who maybe didn't or stopped. And most people, I think I would like to add, most people are going to be fine with you. And most people are just they're going to continue the friendship in some form or another. Yes, it's going to change because you're not training together. But I didn't have a ton of people just Xing me out necessarily. I think distance created maybe a fault in the friendships simply because you're not with them all the time, out of sight, out of mind. So I didn't take it personal. But those that I was closer to have all kind of remained in some form or fashion. It wasn't as hard for me in that sense. My advice would be focus on those that do stay, and then focus on building the relationships at your new gym, because that's where you're heading now. And anyone else that decided that they did not want to continue that friendship or ride with you, excuse my French, but fuck them. It's harsh to say, but I can't hold on to any feelings that are negative about people who have X'd me out. It's okay. I don't take it personal.
Yeah, nothing is more harmful and more painful than unreciprocated relationships. If you want to be someone's friend, but they don't want to be your friend, chasing that friendship is not a good idea. Just move on with your life. There's billions of people on the planet. You're going to find other people that you like more anyway if you just keep your eyes open. And so I think that feeling that you need to cling on to these dying or dead friendships is not positive for anyone long term. And if you're looking to switch gyms, it's a bad reason to stay at your gym. If you think that your friendships with the people there are conditional and that they will stop being your friend if you switch gyms, then honestly, they were never your friend to begin with in the first place. It was a relationship of convenience. And one of the nice things, if there is a positive about switching gyms and kind of filtering out your list of connections, is that you learn who your friends really are. And like you said, there's a lot of people at the first gym that I left years ago who I'm still very good friends with. Most of the people back there that I want to be friends with, they're still my friends. Switching gyms for me really just succeeded at filtering out all of the people I didn't want to be affiliated with, and it made my life much, much better at the end of the day.
Completely same thing here. And it's just it's a great filter. And some people you may have helped them at competitions or to prepare, but like you said, it's just a convenience. It was something that happened in that moment. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You're going to have friends and people that are going to slide into your life at one point and they're going to be seasonal and they go away on some other point. I personally don't take it personal. I've grown to understand that people are just they're going to people. And I'm going to have them at certain points in my life where we're both benefiting from it. I'm going to make a decision that maybe pulls me away or they pull away. Completely fine. It's just life.
Mm-hmm. I'm almost afraid to even ask you this, David, but I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job unless I did. Something that I'm sure you will agree is that over the past, 7, 8 years or so, I've really noticed that a lot of non-secular stuff is being brought into jiu-jitsu. People are bringing in their politics into jiu-jitsu, their religion, their belief systems. And I think a lot of this further serves to alienate people and drive them away. I mean, I know for me, when the pandemic happened, a big challenge for me was learning that a lot of the people that I trained with, we would smile and slap hands and bump fists and have a good time on the mat. But I realized around that point, once they started getting more vocal about their beliefs, that really a lot of the things that these people say and do are just completely anathema to what I believe. And I'm not even sure we can coexist if our beliefs are that far apart. But I also don't want to be the kind of person who cuts people out just because they believe different things from me. I'm sure you've been through something similar as well, because I know that you've always worn your heart on your sleeve. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, what do you do if you're at a gym and your instructor starts branching into things that you don't really feel comfortable with them talking about? I mean, normally that's going to come down to, politics or religion in the gym, but not always. Sometimes it might just be other stuff. Maybe they just keep trying to sell you on other businesses and other products and it's just not working for you. What do you do in a situation like that where you start to discover these things about people that you normally used to have a great time with, but now the more you learn about them, the more you realize there's actually this wedge between us?
Funny you bring that up because politics made its way into the gym at some point. Religion made its way into the gym at one point. And I'm not saying which gym. There was examples of each in both. And I was not a fan of any of it. And I had to ignore some of it. But they were also determining factors of why I made the change most recently. And I just find it really weird, personally. I'm at a stage in my life where with like my program, 5 a.m. program, I don't remember the last time I don't think I've ever even brought up politics. I've never brought up religion. I've never brought up anything. It's just always been jiu-jitsu and funny stuff that happens in jiu-jitsu. We share our lives, but there's nothing that's going to splinter the group. So when I started seeing some of that trickle in, that also became red flags for me and things that I had to, at the very end, there were reasons why I ended up leaving. It is not easy, and I find it incredibly weird when I see it.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's not to say people can't believe what they want to believe. And it's not to say that we shouldn't try to get along just when we have different beliefs. Of course, we want to be inclusive and we want to get along. But where I think it becomes a problem is where the people in positions of authority at the gym are using that authority to influence their students politically or spiritually, whether they understand they're doing that or not. It gets very uncomfortable. And I always ask people who are doing that, people will often say things like, well, this is a very big part of my life and I really believe this, so I want to bring that to my students. And I mean, look, I understand that. I understand you're not coming from a bad place here, but think of the flip side. If someone came into your gym who believed the exact opposite of what you believe, and they started trying to use your gym as a platform to influence your students politically or spiritually, how would you feel about it? Most people would not like it, right? And it's just, I think that jiu-jitsu is at its best when it brings people together, and it's really hard to bring people together when you start introducing the elements from the outside world that tear us apart, especially now, right? Where it feels, at least in my 40 years on this planet, people are more divided than ever. The thing I always love about jiu-jitsu is that it's a common denominator that we can all throw everything else aside. We can lock ourselves in a padded room, isolate ourselves from the rest of the world for an hour to an hour and a half, and just bond with people that in a way that we might not normally bond with. And when we start introducing things like religion and spirituality and politics to that environment, you start filtering out those people who don't agree with you necessarily, and that's going to make your gym a lot more homogeneous, right? And I think that the more diversity you've got in a gym, the better off you're going to be. And frankly, if you're the business owner, right, more diversity is good for you because that means more customers. So I am a big fan of keeping a wall between this stuff. Again, not because I begrudge anyone their beliefs, but because I just think jiu-jitsu is at its best when we focus on how it can include people rather than how it can drive people away.
Completely. So I work at a university, just as an example. I didn't want to use the gyms. I work in a university, and the university is very big on inclusion, and they have all these different programs and groups that employees and students can get into if they would like. Some of them are religious, some of them are ethnic-based or nationality-based or whatever. But the difference being my boss doesn't make those inclusions within the department. And once you start including those into the class structure, whether it be at the beginning, the end, or you start maybe giving lectures during class about this religious tenement or whatever you'd like, that's when it starts to get a little weird for people. There's nothing wrong with like, hey, we have this Sunday class, it's 9 to 10, and it's Christian based. If anyone wants to join, please join. Completely different. I think that's different than we're starting to include things into the normal classes, and now you're kind of putting people off or making people feel unwelcome who may not be of that denomination. That's where the line is for me, at least.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction, actually. Again, like with everything else in jiu-jitsu, I think it comes down to consent. I mean, there are a lot of people who have faith-based martial arts practices where they at least feel there is enough of a parallel in the practice that they market them together. I mean, if you're going to do that, it's not for me personally. Like, I don't need and I don't want a religious jiu-jitsu experience, but I'm certainly not going to tell other people don't do it. Where I think it is a problem is where it's not what people signed up for and you're making it weird for people who just thought they were doing martial arts. Like with everything, if it's consent-based, it's really hard to criticize it. And if this is how you market your jiu-jitsu and people really want that experience and they know what they're getting into, I mean, I don't see any harm in that. I mean, granted, of course, you run the risk of driving away a lot of potential customers. And I think you still fail to benefit from one of the greatest things about jiu-jitsu, which is its ability to bring people together. So for that reason, I would certainly not recommend a married practice where you bring in something like a belief system to jiu-jitsu. But if you're marketing that and everyone knows what they're getting, I'm not going to say it's a cult or anything, right? I mean, there's a lot of talk about what is my gym a cult? And frankly, if people know what they're getting into and they consent to it up front, it's probably not a cult. Where it becomes a problem is where it's a situation of boiling the frog slowly. Someone comes in thinking they're just getting martial arts, and then over time, they start to realize that what they signed up for is not what they thought they had signed up for. That's where there's an issue.
Completely agree. And it's hard. The boiling the frog sentiment is like perfect because it is hard to, like, people ask, why did you stay so long? And it wasn't all at once. And in a lot of these situations, you go into the gym, your eyes aren't completely open or you don't notice certain things. And you go in there and you're having fun, you make some friends, you get promoted, and then you get to a point where maybe now you're working or you're more of a leadership role, and now you're seeing behind the curtain, you're seeing how this is deployed, how that's manufactured or pushed. And then that's when you start to see, oh, I'm in a situation that I'm not necessarily happy with. And that's how it was kind of for me. I didn't see certain things early on, and it just took a couple of years, got to a point where I was in a leadership position, and now I'm seeing, okay, I'm not okay with some of these things here. Are they big enough for me to make a stink over, try to change, or do I make a separation?
Yeah, absolutely. That was very much my experience. When I started jiu-jitsu, being a white belt was probably the most fun I've had in my entire journey, at least so far. I got to meet all of these new people. I got to try something new. Of course, when you're a white belt, all of the techniques and skills you're learning are brand new. So you're measurably getting better very, very quickly because you're starting from nothing. But once I got to blue belt, that's when I started to get exposed to the things that you talked about, where I realized there is this entire backstage behind the scenes political structure at the gym that's just really gross. And I just came here to learn martial arts, right? I didn't come here because I care about who's beefing with who other or with everyone else. And I don't want to be a part of that. And that was a big part of what ultimately led me to leave. Was at some point the gym owner invented a beef with one of his coaches and they tried to drag me into it. And my thought was, look, I'm a grown man here. I am not going to be told by a glorified personal trainer who I can and can't associate with. That isn't going to happen. But it took me a while to get to that point because, again, sunk cost fallacy, right? I'd already put 2 years of my life into this gym at this point, and it's hard to leave, especially when, as we talked about earlier, you've taken the time to build all of these relationships with people. And you don't really know how they're going to respond to you leaving. I mean, probably it's going to be okay, right? Probably they're going to say, yeah, it's fine. We'll still get together on weekends and grab a drink or whatever. But you don't really know that for sure until it happens. And the whole what if scenarios playing in your head of what could go wrong if you quit, it could be very overwhelming, especially if it gets to the point where jiu-jitsu has become a big part of your identity. So this is why I always tell people, when you're about to join a jiu-jitsu gym, that's one of the most important decisions you're going to make, because it's really easy to leave a gym if you've only been to one of their trial classes. It's a lot harder to leave a gym if you've been training there for 5 years and half of your social network trains at that gym too. So prevention is better than cure. And you really want to make sure when you make a decision, like I'm going to train at this new gym, you really want to make sure that you've done your homework to validate that decision before you commit. This is a lesson I really wish someone had sat down and explained to me when I started jiu-jitsu, because I just went to the first gym that appeared on Google and I just trained there. I didn't bother going to any other gyms. I didn't know that like gym cult-like behavior was a thing. So I just went to the first gym and I just stayed there. And it wasn't until I left that I realized, I got this other point of comparison at this new gym that I was at, and I realized, well, this other gym is so much better than where I was training. I realized I was probably about a year behind where I should have been in terms of skill development, just because my prior gym was that bad. And it took me a long time to build up to the level I actually should have been at. But again, you don't know all of this stuff if you just walk into a gym and sign a contract and stay there for 5 years. So I really do think if there's one thing that I would impress upon everyone, it's when you're starting jiu-jitsu, do your diligence. Try a bunch of gyms. Ask around, do some Googling, look for weird stories and weird drama about the gyms before you commit. And similarly, if you're at a gym and you're leaving that gym, don't make the same mistake again. Make sure that this time you definitely do that diligence so you know what you're getting into.
When people ask me, hey, what gym should I join or try? I immediately tell them, get a list, and I'll provide a list if you want me to. Get a list of 3 to 5 different gyms, varying distances, because the easiest thing to do is just to, I'm going to go to the closest one or the one that I can afford. Try different things. Try gyms that are in an association. Try gyms that are not in association. Try gyms that maybe are a little farther away. So yes, you may need to drive a little farther, but maybe it's better to you. When you go do the trial, try as many different classes as instructors as possible so you can get a solid feel for what the gym is, not just the one instructor. Ask questions about, am I allowed to cross-train? How are promotions done? Do you pay for promotions? Do you pay for a test? Do you pay for your belt? Do you have a policy in place for bullying? Do you have a policy in place for sexual harassment? Watch classes. An underrated act is not even taking part in the class, it's just watching. That way you're not enthralled with the actual techniques and the razzle-dazzle that you might get of everyone being nice to you and letting you work and all this other stuff. Just watch and see how kids are handled, how the women are handled. If there are women, if there are no women, that's probably a red flag. If the kids program is suffering, might be a red flag. Watch how the parents interact with one another, how they interact with the instructor or the front desk. Just watch. And if you start to see a lot of weird things where maybe women aren't around or people are almost acting nervously, it's something you have to watch out for. Because I've had students that have told me, I used to go to this gym and the reason I'm coming to yours is because I used to sit in the car and I would get nervous going in, not because I was going to have a hard time training, but because the environment was not all that welcoming and I was worried that I was going to piss off the instructor or I was going to annoy this person or that person. Like, watch how people interact with each other. If it's free flowing, if you hear a lot of laughter, talking, people enjoying themselves while they're drilling, like those are all positives. If it's super quiet and people are not laughing, like for me, if I do a class, I want you guys to laugh. I want you guys to have fun, ask questions. If that is non-existent, it's probably a red flag.
Yeah, I would be inclined to agree. And other people might feel differently, but for me, I think that element of fun is absolutely key for a gym. Some people will think that if you go to a hyper-competitive gym, everyone's always dead serious there and no one's having fun. I'm not sure I buy that. I think that bleeds way too easily into like traditional top-down instruction where you can't do anything unless the instructor approves it. I mean, there was that Instagram reel floating around a while ago with that dude who was complaining about the girls in his class giggling. Just an absolutely ridiculous thing to say. I mean, if people are not having fun in your room, I don't know what to tell you. If you think that you're going to produce better athletes and competitors by denying them fun in the gym, I think you're going to find that a lot of much more successful coaches than you would disagree with you. I've talked to a lot of great coaches and great athletes on this podcast, and pretty much every single one of them identifies the element of fun as one of the most important elements of a good room. If you're not having fun, it doesn't matter how dedicated you are to win gold medals, you're just not going to hang around over the long term.
Exactly. Everything is related to fun. If your walls are down because you're having a good time, more information will get in. If you're so wrapped up in, oh, I can't laugh, or I can't joke, or I can't make this comment, or what is my instructor going to think, always looking this way, you're going to make more mistakes. And then if your mistakes are highlighted and you're put down by the mistakes, then you're going to make even more mistakes. Eventually, you either quit the sport or you quit the program.
Yeah. Something we've talked about on the podcast before is that notion of psychological safety, feeling like you are allowed to be vulnerable and express weakness and express your true personality in the training room. If you don't feel like you can be yourself and be vulnerable in the training room, you need to find a better training room, because being vulnerable is how we learn. If you're afraid to show vulnerability, you're never going to put yourself in situations where you're deficient. And that's how you grow, is by putting yourself in situations where you're deficient. So again, underrated quality of a good gym is psychological safety. Are people afraid to ask the instructor questions? Are they afraid to have fun? Those are never good signs in a gym. So that is, as you wisely pointed out, something you definitely want to look at when you're assessing a new gym.
Yeah, just reminded me of the story of, I had a student come to me and they said, well, my work and life are getting a little hectic. I work on this side of town. The gym is on this. I might need to leave and find a new gym. I did not take it personal. I did not talk down to him. I welcomed the discussion that he felt comfortable enough to have that with me, knowing that he may leave. My approach was not the approach that I've seen, which is the approach that I've normally see is instructors taking it personally and almost getting into a tense discussion. With him and I, we discussed it. I said, all right, I completely understand. You have to make decisions for you and your family. I get it. We discussed some schools that he can potentially try. I told him to touch back with me. I would love to know what your experiences are. He went and tried these gyms and ultimately came back to me, I think a week or two later, and said, I tried them. They felt good, but they didn't feel like home. I'm going to try to make this schedule work as best as I can because I love the environment that I'm in. I did not shut the door when he approached me about a difficult conversation. The door was open. I offered my suggestions. I didn't put him down. I didn't make him feel like he couldn't come to me. He made the decision to come back because the door was open. That's part of the issue with this topic is sometimes instructors or gym owners, they shut all this stuff down and the student doesn't have an avenue to discuss any of this. So ultimately, they either get bitter, unhappy, and just leave. But it's our job to have these conversations and let them feel like they can at least open up and share what they might be going through and salvage whatever the situation might be. So my suggestion to instructors, don't take any of this personal. A lot of it has nothing to do with us, as long as you have a healthy gym, that is, and let your students come to you for wanting questions when they're in class. If they have issues with people, they should feel comfortable coming to you. If they have issues with maybe the schedule and they may need to step away or go or change, provide that customer service from the moment they stepped in as trial guy to the moment that they leave, so that the door is always open for them to return and they feel like they're welcome.
That's another really important point, and another reason why it's so dumb to burn bridges if one of your students wants to go somewhere else. They might come back. I mean, jiu-jitsu is growing, but it's still a relatively small community. If you torch the relationship with one of your students because they're trying to leave, you completely close the door to the possibility of them ever coming back. I remember when I was much younger, there was a time when it was looking like I was going to get a really exciting job opportunity that would require me to move out of town. And I told my instructor about this, and he was like, hey, I'm so happy for you. Of course, we're going to miss you here, but this is fantastic for you personally, so this is great news. And then at some point, it didn't work out and I decided to stay. And then my instructor said, "Hey, that's fantastic. I'm so glad you stayed. We really would have missed you." So like if he had decided to just sling shit at me on the way out the door, I would have wound up having to find another gym. And so it's really dumb to burn bridges over something as stupid as someone wanting to go and try another gym. I know that in jiu-jitsu, because it is a very intimate practice, we sometimes connect and bond with people. And if you're the gym owner, it can feel like this massive breach of trust if someone wants to go train somewhere else. But as I've always said here, like it's just a business, right? You can't take it personally. If a customer wants to try something else, it's not always personal. I mean, sometimes it's financial, sometimes there's life reasons. And frankly, even if they do have a completely valid reason for leaving, rather than torching them for that, it's probably in your best interests to do a bit of introspection. Because if people are leaving your gym because they don't like you, right? If one person is willing to tell you that to your face, it means there's probably dozens of other people who left for the same reason and they didn't feel comfortable having that chat with you. So even if someone is leaving due to a personality conflict, it's helpful to use that as an opportunity for introspection, because maybe there's something you as the coach could be doing better.
I don't think people in general do that enough. But yes, there should be some kind of introspection. There should be some kind of exit interview in a sense. What could I have done better? How can I have addressed concerns, issues? Was there anything that maybe you felt I was lacking? Like, I don't have a problem having those conversations with people. And I actually want that feedback. So often we have these relationships that are more like dictator and peasant or parent-child in this scenario. And really, we're all adults. And it should be a shared responsibility of how do I get you, the student, to the thing that you want to do? And understanding that you may not stay with me this entire time. You may leave the country, you may leave the state, you may leave for a job. And I want to have the ability to help you get to wherever you get to. To me, it does not matter where you go. I want you to go and then flourish, maybe have me, maybe this relationship continues even though you've left. But I want that relationship where you feel I'm investing in you for the sake of investing in you, not because you're quote unquote mine and I get to have ownership over you.
Yeah, I see this sometimes too with high-level athletes where when they switch camps, the old coach gets salty because they feel like, their star athlete has been poached or taken from them. And like, look, you can't own another human being. You can't claim ownership of someone and get mad if they want to go somewhere else. I shouldn't even have to legislate why that's a problem, but it does happen sometimes. It's a mindset that some people take. I would ask you though, David, anything else that you would recommend people consider when they're switching to a new gym? I've got some ideas and some things on my mind, but any other, maybe not even red flags, but like orange or yellow flags that you think are worth bringing up?
For me, long-term contracts, strict uniform policies are iffy for me. I don't necessarily like them, especially if they're expensive. A lack of student-teacher relationship, and I know that's a hard one to grasp when you're visiting, but like if a gym has almost like a cadre of professors or instructors that kind of make sure that everything's okay, that setup is huge for me, and I think it's a beautiful thing. When everything seems to only come from one person and you ask a question, be like, oh yeah, that's the guy. You ask another question, oh yeah, he makes the decisions. That if the instructor is not taking inventory of themselves and self-analyzing, it's a bad thing. I get they're the owner, they make the final decision, but it should always feel like a partnership with everyone that's in there. And those are harder things to grasp when you're a visitor, unfortunately.
Yep. Something that I got a story. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's a great podcast called Elbows Tight. And I did a guest episode with him a long time ago. Also, I mean, if you're a jiu-jitsu beginner, I definitely recommend their stuff. It's a great, highly well-produced podcast. And I'm not just saying that because they had me on, but they had me on to answer some questions about how to choose a gym and how to get started in the sport. And one of the questions they asked me was, if I want to start at a new gym, what should I do? What should I look out for? And I think they expected me to say something along the lines of find out if they have a uniform policy or whatever. But what I told them was take the instructor's name, put it into Google, and add the word rape or assault or crime or drama at the end, and just make sure that nothing comes up, because you might be surprised what your instructor has been up to. And a lot of bad behavior in jiu-jitsu flies under the radar and it's easy to be suppressed just because this is still such a small sport. And of course, these aren't things that are going to be easy to find necessarily or well advertised. So I always suggest to people, before you start at a gym, do some diligence. Google the gym's name, the instructor's name, add some qualifying keywords that might make the negative stuff rise to the top so that you don't see all of the negative stuff just get buried by SEO, right? You want to be looking for examples of bad behavior or horror stories at that gym. I would also say that if you want to understand how your experience might look like, should you ever leave a gym, go onto the social media, see what they post. To me, if you go onto a gym's Instagram page and they're using their business page to promote some pretty unhinged stuff or unprofessional stuff, or they're talking shit on there, weigh that very heavily before you decide to train there. Because understand, if the instructor is willing to use their business page as a place to insult or attack other people, they very well may be willing to do that to you at some point if you ever upset them or leave their gym or something else like that. So to me, that's really very much a warning sign. If you see someone's profile online, their business page, and they're not using it the way that you would expect a business to professionally use that outlet, understand that you might one day be on the receiving end of that as well. And that's very much to me a red flag before you go to any gym whatsoever.
Great point. And there's no way to verify this, but you could always also ask, does the academy do background checks on its instructors? It's rare, and it's not necessarily a red flag if they don't, but it's a definite green flag if they say, yes, we do that for anyone new that we hire. That way you at least have an understanding that they're taking your safety into account on top of just the gym culture that you can actually see.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the thing about background checks, they're definitely not going to be a guarantee that you've eliminated all of the bad actors. I mean, just due to the way jiu-jitsu is, you're going to get a lot of young people showing up at the gym. Probably a lot of them won't have ever done anything explicitly criminal that they've been caught for. So a background check is not a guarantee. But as you mentioned, the more important thing is it is an indicator that the owner cares. Same with the having a code of conduct or a policy guide on the wall that explains what is and isn't permitted in the gym. I mean, people might look at that and think it's just like corporate fluff and it doesn't matter, but it actually does matter because it means that the gym owner has taken the time to clarify for everyone what kind of behavior is and isn't permitted in the gym. And presumably they're also making the statement that they're willing to go back and enforce that code of conduct in the future if they have to, because they took the time to publish it. So again, that to me is a really important thing. If you go into a gym and they don't have a code of conduct or a list of do's and don'ts, that's not necessarily a red flag. But again, if someone does have that, I look at that as a very strong positive.
Same here. And again, these are things that you're not going to see until you're there. But the other half of it is, were they enforced at all? And sometimes you see certain rules applied to some people and not applied to others. But again, that's something that occurs down the road and not during your trial necessarily.
Now, the one thing, though, that I will add for fairness is that when someone is talking shit on the internet, you really need to take that with a grain of salt. And I bring this up because sometimes you will see negative reviews or negative statements made about jiu-jitsu gyms that wind up being completely unfounded. I mean, I can give you an example. I know a guy who is a jiu-jitsu gym owner, and someone one-starred him on Google reviews and posted this big thing about how it was a terrible gym and they kicked me out for no reason, blah, 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 blah. And the gym owner responded and publicly said, here's what actually happened. And it turned out that this guy that they kicked out was an absolute lunatic. He was beating the hell out of people in the MMA class. And when told to dial it down, his response was something to the effect of, I'm an animal, I swing for the fences. I mean, just totally toxic garbage behavior, but you wouldn't know that from looking at the review that he left on Google. You would think that this guy was totally in the right and it was the gym that was at fault. So I do bring this up because we live in a day and age where it is very easy to weaponize character assassination at almost no risk to the person doing it. And people will do this all the time. I mean, I'm sure like anyone who's run a business, I'm sure has had this happen to them where someone has come to them and threatened them and said, do this for me or I will give you a negative review. So that does happen. And it's important to understand that just because a company has one crazy one-star review, that does not mean that they're necessarily bad or that they're a cult or anything like that. You kind of, like with the scientific method, right? You're not looking for one signal. You're looking for a pattern of signals that are reputable and repeatable over time. So it's one thing if there's just one element that's kind of sketchy and you're not sure if you can trust it. But if you are seeing repeat messages to look out for this place, then you definitely want to take that seriously.
Yeah, we had a similar issue with someone who we had to cancel their membership over, and it got messy on Yelp, and a lot of things were being said on Yelp that weren't necessarily true. And again, the business responded to it with saying, this is actually what happened, and this the bad part for the business is that it doesn't necessarily disappear. It's there, and sits there. But like most things, to your point, you're looking at multiple data points, because you will have gyms that have stellar reviews, 5 stars, 49, 100, whatever responses, but they're obviously people who are in there who are loving the academy. I, for example, it was someone who was unhappy, but I didn't make a review afterwards. I didn't think it was worth it. I felt it was weird for me to do that, so I did not. So a gym can have issues and still be 5-star, and they just didn't make it onto the reviews, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also important to understand that no gym is perfect. You are not going to roll into a jiu-jitsu gym and find out that it's all just human angels who are training and nothing ever goes wrong, right? I mean, you take a random selection of 50 people and you throw them in a combat sport where you're simulating murder, something's going to happen at some point. And so the presence of a bad situation is not necessarily an indictment of the gym. What matters more is how did the gym respond to it? I mean, if there was an incident at the gym that was terrible and the instructor let it slide or disregarded it or downplayed it or attacked the victim, that's obviously a red flag. But if there was an incident at the gym and the instructor jumped on it, resolved it right away, was very open and transparent about what happened and how to prevent it going forward, that's actually a green flag in a lot of ways. Because as an instructor, I mean, you cannot control the behavior of all of the crazy humans who are going to walk in and out of your door, right? But what you can do is control how you respond to their behavior and how you enforce your own guide of ethics. So that to me, I think is more important than the presence of a horror story, is how did the instructor respond if something bad did actually happen?
The other part of this, sometimes nothing bad happens. And sometimes when you're like the 20-something-year-old, it's perfectly fine with the gym the way it is. And maybe they're a high-level competitor and it's catered to competitors and they don't see anything wrong with the gym. But you get a little older, now you're more of a hobbyist, maybe you have a family now, and then that's when you start to see certain things that you didn't see as the younger version of you. So people's stage in lives also changes with what is important to them when it comes to switching gyms. And it doesn't mean that a gym is necessarily bad. It's just not what I am looking for at this stage in my life.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, is that leaving a gym does not always mean there's anything wrong with the gym. Sometimes you leave a gym just because your goals have diverged from that gym's goals, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. I have dropped in at gyms where I take a look in the door and I go, geez, I don't want to train at this place, right? It's a bunch of like 20-somethings beating the shit out of each other and they're all dudes. But it wasn't always like that. When I started jiu-jitsu, I was that 20-something young dude who wanted to beat the shit out of other dudes. And if that's the culture that you're looking for and that's the level of training that you want, that's fine, right? But as you get older, your goals diverge. Sometimes they diverge in the opposite direction. Sometimes you start jiu-jitsu as a hobby, but then your love and dedication to the sport grows and grows and grows. And it gets to the point where you realize, I cannot achieve my goals training at this gym anymore. And you have to leave because you have to go bigger. That happens a lot with pro competitors, right? Maybe they started jiu-jitsu at some local hobbyist gym. They fell in love with it. They realize they're super good at it and they want to commit to it, but they just can't get world-class training where they are. So it's like, no hard feelings. I got to leave. That happens all the time. And it shouldn't be a problem. If anything, it should be a celebration, right? Because the goal of a coach should be to grow their students beyond their own level. That's really what a coach wants to do, not create carbon copies of themselves. You want to create students who are better than you ever could have been. And so if you are running a strip mall jiu-jitsu gym and one of your students graduates and grows beyond the level that you can help them, and now they have to go off and train at a world-class team so that they have a shot at being one of the best in the world, celebrate them, right? Repost their shit on social media, champion them. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. You're always going to have been a part of their journey, and burning the bridge with that person just because they wanted more than you could give them, that's never the sign of a healthy gym or a healthy relationship.
Ego check. Just understand that, again, like I said earlier, some people are going to come into your life for that season. You were their coach for that season to build the structure that is what he or she is going to now take to that competitive gym. To your point, celebrate it. Hey, I got this person to that stage. Now they're taking over. I'm happy to see them grow. I'm happy to see them do things. At some point, they may come back to teach. They may come back to do seminars. Do not cut people out. If they're healthy relationships, celebrate them. post their stuff, tell them how proud you are of them, celebrate them as individuals because you had some kind of a part in that.
Amazing, man. Well, David, I always love having these chats with you. You're such a great guy. Your thoughts on these very complex issues. A lot of people are afraid to navigate this stuff, but you've always been open and vulnerable about it. And I think that's what I look for in a role model in the sport. I mean, folks like you and Andrew Wiltsey, I love that there's people willing to shed light on things that sometimes don't get talked about. And it's funny because this is the stuff that's really going to matter to people's lives. You know, we get so focused on the technical bullshit in jiu-jitsu and, how do you properly do a saddle and how do you properly do an arm bar? But that's just stuff that kind of comes and goes, or it's a detail that's important in a moment. The things like, how do I find a good gym? Or how do I leave a gym when it's not working out? This is the kind of stuff that people dwell on, they lose sleep over, can really change the course of their lives. So I'm always glad when people are willing to have these conversations. And as always, man, thanks so much for coming by and having this chat. Was there anything else you wanted to add on this topic that we didn't have a chance to cover yet?
One last thing. Part of this equation is when you leave, and you leave, let's say, a toxic gym, and people don't leave with you, that they need to leave too. Don't harp on what their decisions are, why they didn't leave, why they decided to maybe put up with more of the abuse or the negative aspects. We all leave on our own accord and when we're ready. When I left, I did not judge anyone for staying. I did not tell people you need to leave. I will just accept I left when I was ready. They're going to do the same thing. There's no need to judge them for staying. There's no need to judge them for not having worked it out or gotten to a point where you are. Again, we're all moving at our own space, in our own lanes, accept each of us how we are.
Awesome, man. Well, great way to close this off. If people want to follow you or connect with you, how do they go about doing that?
Instagram and Threads, dfm.2099. I'm a little bit more active on Threads these days. It seems to be slightly more positive, but I am active on Twitter as Jiu-Jitsu Journal. If you guys want to support my students in terms of competing or seminar sponsorships, you could always buy something at DawnBreakersBJJ.com. But yeah, I'm genuinely active. I love answering questions. If people need advice on something, you can always DM me.
Awesome. And like I said, I think your stuff is definitely worth a follow. I love your IG posts. Keep them up, man. And I will obviously encourage everyone here to follow you there. I'll also put all of the links to that stuff in the show notes to make it easier for people to find you. And I'll put a link to our stuff as well. Everything we make lives at bjjmentalmodels.com. The podcast is very, very close to 300 episodes now, but we've always tried to structure this show so that every episode is a capsule lesson that's always going to be helpful. You should be able to go back to the very beginning and get value out of that stuff. I also suggest that people sign up for our newsletter, which is completely free. We just crossed 10,000 subscribers, which is a big deal for us. And it looks like now we're about to cross 11,000. So I think if I'm lucky, I'm hoping this thing is snowballing. And that's great because I love writing the newsletter. I try to always make it worth people's time to sign up for the newsletter. So if you join, every once in a while, we give away freebies like free instructionals, probably one of the best and easiest ways to get stuff like that. And again, all of that is on the website and I'll put that in the show notes. But all of this is powered at the end of the day by BJJ Mental Models Premium. I always want to keep this thing ad free. And the way that we do that is by our premium subscribers. If you are not a subscriber to BJJ Mental Models Premium, I would highly consider it. You'll get access to what I understand to be the largest library in the world of jiu-jitsu courses on philosophy, strategy, tactics, mental models, of course, concepts. Most other instructionals are very visual. They focus on teaching you how to do techniques, things that are ultimately kind of more memory, recall and repeat type stuff. If you listen to the podcast for a while, you probably know where I stand on the effectiveness of that stuff. What we make is primarily audio, which is one of my favorite ways to communicate big ideas in jiu-jitsu, but we are actually growing the video library on there as well. We've also got just an incredible community. A lot of people sign up for premium just for community access alone. You go up to our coaching tier, you'll even get rolling reviews from us. So we've got a team of black belts around the world, some of the best black belt coaches you will find, quite literally, who will provide you with one-on-one customized, tailored feedback. And we've even got a pro tier that we're growing now. So if you are a jiu-jitsu business and you're looking for business support, whether that be marketing, product, how to get people into your seminars, how to grow your brand, how to incentivize new students to sign up at your gym, we're building out a toolkit for people in that position as well. So check out our pro tier if that's something that you're interested in. If you want to ask questions what all of this means or get a free trial or just learn more about what we offer, shoot me a message or sign up and get the free trial. The first 7 days are free. Everything we make lives at bjjmentalmodels.com. That's also how you can contact me. And of course, I will put a link to that in the show notes too. But David, man, thank you so much for coming by. This is a great follow-up to our last chat. Always love having you on here. And I'm looking forward to part 3 at some point in the future too.
Thank you so much.
Most welcome, sir. Thanks to everyone who hangs out with us every week. I appreciate you very much, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.